He sat alone in a corner booth, a man with tired eyes, a faded jacket, and a service dog at his side. His presence was quiet, but the voices around him, loud, cruel. They laughed at the limp in his walk, whispered loud enough for him to hear, and just when it seemed no one would do a thing, a man in uniform stood up. He didn't say a word, but what he did next changed the room, forever. Welcome to the Silent Stories. If moments like these move you, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let me take you to the beginning. It was just another rainy Thursday evening in a small-town diner in Georgia. The kind of place with checkered floors, coffee that never runs dry, and regulars who order the usual before sitting down. At a booth near the window, where the outside streetlights barely reached, sat a man in his late 50s. His hair was short but graying. A deep scar traced the edge of his jawline, and his left hand shook slightly as he reached for his coffee. Next, to him resting quietly on the floor was a golden retriever in a blue vest, a service dog. The man wore a battered military jacket. Faded patches told pieces of a long story: U.S. Army, Afghanistan, 82nd Airborne. A small American flag pin clung to the lapel. People noticed, but most looked away, not out of respect, but discomfort. 2 tables over, a group of younger guys laughed loudly, scrolling on their phones and cracking jokes. One nudged another and nodded toward the veteran. "Bet he's faking it, just wants the attention," one of them whispered, not so quietly. Another chimed in, "Hey, maybe he left his medals at home today." The veteran didn't respond. He'd heard it all before. He stirred his coffee and looked down at the table, his fingers gripping the cup tighter. The dog, sensing his tension, placed its head gently on his knee. A waitress nearby glanced nervously toward the scene. She looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't. That's the thing about small towns. Everyone knows someone, and no one wants to be the first to speak up. As the laughter grew louder and the words got uglier, something in the room began to shift. Not everyone noticed, but one man did. In the back of the diner, seated near the counter, was another figure. Tall, quiet, dressed sharply in a civilian suit, but with a military posture that couldn't be hidden. He had been watching, not with anger, but with the kind of calm that comes before a storm. He folded his napkin slowly, finished his black coffee. Then, without a single word, he stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene, but the air in the diner felt different now, heavier, and every eye slowly turned toward him. He stood tall, not aggressively, but with a quiet confidence that made people sit straighter without realizing it. The man was older, in his early 60s maybe, but carried himself like someone who still ran 5 miles every morning. His eyes scanned the diner, not with fury, but with something far more unsettling to those who had been laughing: calm, controlled judgment. He adjusted the cuffs of his jacket, revealing a silver Marine Corps ring. That was the only hint of who he was: a retired Marine colonel, the kind of man who had commanded troops in battle, negotiated with foreign leaders, and likely written letters to grieving families. A man who'd seen war and carried its weight silently for decades, and now, in a small-town diner, he was about to fight a different kind of battle, not with weapons, not with words, but with presence. He began to walk, slowly, intentionally. Each step was measured, quiet. Not a single sound from his shoes on the tile, but every head in the diner turned to follow. Even the young men who had mocked the veteran fell silent. One of them shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Another cleared his throat. The laughter was gone, replaced by a thick, uneasy stillness. The colonel reached the veteran's table. He didn't look at the bullies. Not once. Instead, He placed his hand gently on the old soldier's shoulder. Then he nodded, a deep, respectful nod, the kind of gesture only warriors understand. The veteran looked up, surprised. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged, but the emotion in that moment was undeniable. The pain, the recognition, the unspoken bond. The colonel then turned slightly, positioning himself beside the table, his hands calmly behind his back, like a sentry, a silent guard. He wasn't going anywhere. He didn't need to, because his message was already clear. If you're going to disrespect him, you'll have to go through me. The entire diner sat frozen. Waitresses stopped pouring coffee. A fork clinked on a plate across the room. Even the hum of the neon sign outside seemed to quiet down. One of the young men, the loudest one, mumbled something about needing to leave. He grabbed his wallet and tossed down a few crumpled bills. Without another word, he and his friends slipped out the door, heads down, not daring to meet the colonel's eyes. Still, the colonel stood there. He didn't watch them leave. His eyes stayed with the veteran, whose hand now trembled less as it rested on his dog's head. There was a tear in the corner of his eye, not from pain, not from shame, but from being seen, finally, truly seen. And in that diner full of strangers, something shifted. The waitress who had stayed quiet. She stepped forward and offered the veteran a warm smile. "Your meal's on the house tonight," she said softly. Others nodded. No one clapped. No one needed to, because respect doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes all it needs is one person willing to stand. The colonel stayed for a while, not long enough to draw attention, but just enough to make sure the air had shifted for good. He eventually placed a $20 bill on the veteran's table, gave one last nod, and quietly left. No applause, no headlines. Just the soft jingle of the diner doorbell as it closed behind him. The veteran sat still for a moment, like he was unsure whether the whole thing had really happened. His hand gently touched the $20 bill. Then he looked around, not with fear this time, but with something closer to hope. A waitress refilled his coffee without asking. A couple near the window smiled at him. The room felt warmer, safer. And something incredible happened after that night. People started noticing him more often, not as the man with the limp, but as Mr. Ray, the local veteran. Some asked about his dog. Others simply nodded as they walked by. The same diner where he once felt invisible became a place he started looking forward to. Every Thursday evening, Mr. Ray came in, ordered the same coffee, and took the same booth. And for some reason, someone always seemed to have already paid his bill. No one claimed credit. Not the waitress, not the manager, not any customer. It just happened. But there was one detail that no one forgot. The seat across from Mr. Ray, the one opposite his, always stayed empty. Like the whole town was saving that spot. Not for just anyone, but for someone who once stood silently and reminded everyone of something we too often forget. That honor doesn't need a microphone. Courage doesn't always wear a uniform, and sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the one that never speaks. Years later, after Mr. Ray passed away quietly in his sleep, the diner owner placed a small plaque on that table. It read, "Reserved for those who served and those who stood with them." They say the colonel never returned, or maybe he did, and just didn't need to stand up again.